With deep breaths, Leah eyed the live wire in Caroline's hand cautiously. "What are you doing? What do you think?" Caroline questioned, holding the wire towards her face and then shocked her with it. Leah screamed as she was being electrocuted. Immediately the wire made contact with her body. "What are you?" Caroline interrogated amidst the torture. "I don't know," she screamed back. Leah couldn't explain how greatly relieved she was when Caroline withdrew the wires, but her body bore the consequences. She smelt like roasted barbecue and there was severe skin burns on her body. Yes, she could heal speedily, but she still has blood running through her veins and electricity has never been known to get along with liquids, and also the pain she felt was acute and real. "Care to answer my question now?" Caroline asked with a brow raised. "I told you I don't know anything," Leah retorted through gritted teeth. How could she answer something she has no idea about? "Fine then, let's continue without further ado." Caroline shocked her with the live wire again, this time the electrocution lasting much longer than before. Leah screamed her lungs out as electric current passed through her body. This was so torturous she felt like dying. And she would have, if Alexa, who obviously couldn't stand it anymore, touched Caroline at the shoulder, halting the torture. Leah experienced a muscle spasm so violent she dislocated her femur and snapped her neck in the process, but still didn't die. "What do you think you're doing?" Caroline bellowed at Alexa, who jumped from fright. "Why, you could have killed her," she timidly managed to say. Caroline threw back her head in pure disbelief before she glared at the idiot. "She is a supernatural, she won't die." "At least, not in this way," but Alexa wanted to say, but the 1000-watt glare from Caroline shut her up. Leah was in so much pain, she couldn't even lift a finger. She was experiencing extremely physical pain that she couldn't help but shiver when Caroline approached her again. "I don't know anything," she cried out when Caroline lifted the wire towards her, again. Her complexion was pale, lips shriveled and taken a bluish hue while her eyes were red and puffy. Leah looked like she had aged 10 years in such a short amount of time. But as usual, Caroline didn't listen and struck her with the live wire. This time the torture duration lasted much longer than the first and second time, while Alexa could only bite her fingers nervously and stare at Leah with a concerned look on her face. Suddenly, the extreme amount of electricity coursing through Leah made her release a blood-curdling scream, so inhuman that it caused Caroline to shiver and take a step back instinctively. Leah was so much peeved, she wanted nothing than to avenge herself. Make Caroline feel the same pain she was experiencing. She just wanted to let everything out. So in such moment of pain and anger, Leah suddenly screeched so loud it caused Caroline and Alexa to buckle at their knees, crying out in pain and shielding their bleeding ears with their hands. Leah's scream was so lethal and violent that the bulb sparked, tiles start to crack and the basement began to collapse. At the party, everyone was having a good time when suddenly all bulbs and lighting effects began to explode with white showers as if overwhelmed by an enormous current. There was a mass hysteria when objects began to fly around, shatter and crumble. Everyone was in a panic, trying to find their way out as the building began to shake, threatening to collapse. As if that was not enough, an eerie scream sent chills down their spine as they ran out of the mansion, swearing never to come back. Lost in her angry fit, Leah didn't realize that her haunting screams were causing physical vibrations that was sending the mansion on the verge of collapse. She would have really brought down the whole building and trapped some alcohol-disoriented kids whom were still inside if someone hadn't knocked her out from behind and she passed out. So far the virus doesn't seem to affect the humans, werewolves only, Ryan explained as he went through the daily report while Daniel sat staring at him with his recent poker face. This is obviously a targeted massacre, Daniel muttered grimly. In just a few days, he has lost over 100+ of his people and still counting. The silver pack, which previously could boast of having a huge population, has been depleted to a shocking number. How long till the antidote is ready? Daniel asked him anxiously. Ryan replied, Amola has been giving test shots which has been showing positive results, so I think it should be ready in a day or two. All right, Daniel sighed, rubbing his face with his palms. I think you should take a rest, you look like shit. Ryan glanced at his friend, noticing how haggard and worn he appeared. Daniel was pale, red-rimmed eyes, dark circles and sunken cheeks betrayed his lack of sleep. His rich blonde hair, although matted and unkempt, had grown to his neck while his features were shaded by 2 days or 3 of stubble. Ryan knew Daniel hadn't had the chance to rest recently. He's been running helter-skelter, settling internal and external disputes the virus has caused with other packs while restraining the spread of the virus in his own domain. The guy was stressed beyond words. Daniel raked his hand through his now longer hair. I can't close my eyes peacefully without nightmares assaulting me, he confessed with a heavy heart. Ryan sighed. He had watched Daniel stand helplessly and witness the deaths of so many people dear to him. But don't worry, I'll try to take a nap and hope I don't see bloody hands trying to reach for me in my sleep, he teased, but it wasn't funny to Ryan at all. That is not funny, Ryan said, and would have scolded him further if he didn't sense a sudden shift in his countenance. What's wrong? Ryan asked worriedly. There was a pained expression on Daniel's face while he was grabbing a certain section of his chest. It's her, Daniel answered curtly, but Ryan knew who he was referring to. The only person that could make their alpha react this way was his one and only mate. He just hoped she wasn't dying, again. What's wrong with her? Ryan asked with concern. He knew for the alpha to experience this, he must have tapped into their mate bond. She is in pain, Daniel answered anguishedly, and before Ryan could question him further, he had zoomed off. And here we go again, Ryan smacked his forehead as the door snapped shut, leaving a gust of wind in its wake. Daniel ran like the devil was on his heels, though she was kilometers away from him, but he persisted and drew strength from his shifter's side. Thankfully it was late at night, so there wasn't anyone available to witness him running speedily like the Flash. He could have transformed into his wolf side, but he couldn't arrive before her since his clothes would be ruined in the process. The thought of her being in danger pushed him into covering an hour distance in 15 minutes. He knew it was definitely strange when the bond activated for the first time without his knowledge, and so he tapped into it, only to feel her anger and distress. Thankfully, the link was strong, so he was able to track her down until a screeching sound suddenly hit his auditory system so hard he had to shield his ears with his hands, which unfortunately didn't help at all. It was no secret that werewolves possess enhanced hearing, so the scream was amplified in his case. Though overwhelmed by the deafening noise, he still pressed forward and entered the mansion where people were running out and scampering for safety. Amidst the pandemonium, he still searched around for his mate, but when he couldn't find her after a long time, he decided to follow where he felt her the most. Trusting and following his instinct, he found himself in the basement where the scream was the loudest and shockingly his mate was the one wailing like a banshee. Disoriented and almost rendered unconscious, he tried to approach her but was pushed back as if some sort of barrier was repelling him. But Daniel wasn't stupid, he knew if he let her continue this mad fit, she would level down the whole building with her scream and injure, possibly kill innocent souls and herself in the process. There were already 2 unknown girls lying unconscious on the basement floor with bleeding ears. Though confused at what's going on, he scrupulously summarized it was a case of bullying, judging from the binds on his mate's hands and legs. He figured out that the distress must have caused her powers to violently manifest. Even though he was puzzled on how she gained such destructive power, he waved the thoughts aside and instead, focused on how to bring down the force field. Determinedly, Daniel put his hands and pressed against the barrier once again, teeth gritting, muscles bulging, bleeding from the eyes, nose, and ears until he pushed through the force field and it collapsed. Still engaged in her enraged fit, Daniel hit her at the back of the head with a tremendous concussive force that knocked her out cold. Wiping away the blood from his eye with the crook of his elbow, he squat down and started to free the girl when he frowned suddenly. He touched the chains as if trying to imprint its feel in his head. His expression shifted. This wasn't an ordinary chain but a silver one designed to incapacitate werewolves. Unlike what was depicted in movies and novels, silver doesn't burn them upon contact but weakens them when exposed to it for long. Unfortunately, it was most lethal to them when inside their body, so a silver bullet through the heart definitely ends them. He turned to stare at the unconscious girls with a lot of questions running amok in his head. How did they? Why did? In fact, there was no time for this. He had a feeling things weren't as simple as he thought. So he quickly unchained her and scooped her into his arms. Looking around the ruins, he shook his head. This would definitely make the headlines. Seriously, dude, cut it out. Your thought is all over the place and it's driving me crazy, Dan complained, irritated and raking his hand through his hair. For the first time in history, he was able to read Asher's mind cause he let his guard down, and yes, at first he was happy, but now it was becoming a nuisance. I think I figured out everything, Asher said with an excited glint in his eyes. Dan sighed. Yes, I heard it in my head, the witch was right. The girl is my mate. Though originally mated to Daniel, but the incident witches as a result of the Dark Witches conspiracy, made her gain a vampiric and a worse side. Personally, I think her vampiric side is stronger, which in turn made her imprint on me, and I also yet, she's your mate. I get that already, Dan interrupted him, rolling his eyes from boredom. This was the nth time he heard his theory tonight. Asher rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What do you think Daniel would do if he finds out everything? What do you think he would do? Everyone knows the war creatures value their mates above everything else, especially alphas, answered Dan truthfully. Asher licked his lips, pondering on his words. His gaze flickered up to Dan again and he said, at first I was happy when I discovered the truth, but the thought of sharing her with Daniel unsettles me a lot. I mean, how are we even going to make this work? At first Dan was confused, but the moment he understood where Asher was coming from, he laughed his head off. Though as funny as it sounds, it was quite a pressing issue. Like seriously, how in the world were they going to have Snus knew? By chance, they wouldn't think of doing it in turns, would they? Or a threesome? Dan shook his head and shuddered. He wouldn't even dare think about that. What about Caroline? Dan asked, finally discovering a topic that would take his mind off his lewd thoughts. Asher frowned. Caroline? He clarified, she became a thing of the past the moment I found out about Leah, and she's cool with that? Why shouldn't she be? She knew from the start our relationship was just for pleasure and a temporary arrangement, he conceded as Dan made a sound. Fine. Dan shrugged but suddenly noticed a change in Asher's demeanor. Why? What's wrong? Asher grimaced. I feel strange. Strange as in? He prodded when Asher didn't give him a solid explanation. Asher explained with uncertainty, I feel distressed and uncomfortable, as if. His voice trailed off suddenly, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. Leah? Dan asked, confused. Leah? What's wrong with Leah? Unfortunately, Asher didn't answer him, instead prompted him immediately. Quick! Take me to her place. I think she's in danger. He hurriedly placed a hand on Dan's shoulder and he teleported the both of them to her place at once. They found themselves in front of her house, but Asher was quick to say, she's not home. Dan turned to stare at him, surprised. How did you know? He asked. I just felt it, which Dan proved true when he couldn't pick up the girl's scent. You're right, Dan agreed, and had already planned leaving when they picked up discussions coming from the living room. Asher clearly heard a voice which he guessed belongs to Jenny, asking, so tell me, Trevor, how do you feel about this Caroline girl that invited Leah to her house party? Asher froze. He didn't need to hear further cause he had put two and two together quickly. His expression darkened and his gaze turned bloody. Caroline would be damned if she lays a finger on her. Dan shivered when he saw the rage in Asher's eyes. He heard the conversation, and though he wasn't as smart as Asher, but he knew it was by no means a coincidence that Leah gets to be in danger in a party Caroline invited her to. Caroline knows everything about the supernaturals, cause the Garcias are one of the founding families of Little Town, and it wasn't a secret that Asher has been favoring Leah lately. Never underestimate the power of a jealous woman. Dan didn't wait for Asher to order him this time. He silently teleported the both of them to Caroline's place, but something happened. As soon as they appeared, their knees buckled and they slumped to the ground, racked by a haunting scream. Thankfully the ordeal didn't last long, cause soon the scream ended and they were eased from the paralyzing effect. But the scene that confronted them left them stunned. Young people were running helter-skelter trying to get away from the mansion, all characterized by bleeding ears. The once regal mansion that could turn heads was half ruined. The east wing of the house had collapsed completely, while some walls buckled and were bent. Most bulbs were destroyed and the ones still giving light were flickering on and off, giving the place an eerie feeling. In fact, everything was a mess. As he walked into the mansion, Asher was troubled. Though he was confused at what was going on, but he had a bad premonition in his heart. He had a gut feeling that his mate was responsible for this magnitude of destruction. The girl's existence so far has shocked him a lot, so he wouldn't be surprised if this was her doing too. He traced her scent to the basement, where he found Caroline on all fours, clutching her stomach and moaning in pain, still yet no sign of his mate. But that was until he caught a rancid yet familiar scent in the air and sighed deeply. He was late. Daniel was here before him. Frustrated and angry, he grabbed Caroline by the collar and drew her up to her feet. What did you do? He roared at her, and though she stared at him wide-eyed, frightened, yet her gaze was groggy. Peeved, Asher tried to scare her further, but all he got in return was her pained grunts and incoherent mumbling. Exasperated, he pushed her away and she dropped to the ground with a loud thud. Asher has never been frustrated in his entire life until now, and he knew his time was limited. There was no way the council would leave such a huge-scale disaster like this unattended to, so they must have sent out their agents to come and investigate what was going on. That is, if they were not here already. Immediately, Asher squat down and grabbed Caroline's chin, lifting her face to his gaze, and began his compulsion. You are not to remember Leah and any previous encounters you've ever had with her, understood? Under his control, Caroline couldn't resist but nod her head obediently, and he let go of her satisfied. He could have erased all her memories, but he knew it would seem suspicious and completely risky if the council happens to interrogate her, since he knows the founding families have a tight relationship with the council. But he had to protect Leah, especially now he has confirmed she was his other half. So he looked around carefully, searching for any evidence that could implicate his mate, and when he found nothing, he left. Asher still had one more thing to do, and that was finding his favorite human, Ben. He knew wherever Leah was, he would surely be there, and he alone could tell him what went down here. Unfortunately, Asher made a mistake. He forgot that just as Ben would always be around Leah, Alexa, and Linda would always be around Caroline too. Did you hear that? Shane asked all of a sudden, lifting his crossbow and looking around cautiously. Definitely heard that, Chris acknowledged. Glancing around, he pulled out his gun from his black leather holster that hung around his waist. They were both wearing black leather suit that camouflaged their figure in the late night, while they had their back pressed to each other, looking around carefully with raised and loaded weapons. Today was Friday, and they were out there in the woods hunting for creatures who liked to have their own twisted version of fun in the late hours, when they heard a scream that sent chills down their spine. Little Town was a mountain town, thus becoming a safe haven for many supernatural creatures thanks to the abundance of forest and wildlife. Hunters might not be as enhanced as some supernatural creatures, but they were definitely above an average human thanks to intense and harsh trainings, near-death experiences, and witches' elixirs and magic. Possessing inhuman sight, hearing, agility, and strength, they were made a weapon against creatures that proved to be a threat. I think it's coming from there. Shane pointed to a faraway hill. That leads to the Garcia's home, Chris summarized, stretching his neck to get a better view. I think we should go check it out. And the hunt? Shane reminded. Chris pondered for a while, observing his environment before replying. I don't see any soul in distress, he added, but to be sure, you can call another person to take your place, but we seriously needed to visit the Garcia's cause. I feel something is wrong. Fine, Shane mumbled in agreement and reluctantly followed along. It took them a while to get there, but the scene that greeted them when they arrived knocked them for six. There was only one word to qualify what was going on: chaos. There was a terrible hullabaloo in the air. Young people were on all fours, some squatting, others lying on their front, back or side and moaning in pain with bleeding ears, while the few paramedic available attended to them. Others were knocked out cold, while the few still on their feet were helping the paramedic carry some students in severe conditions onto the stretcher and into the ambulance. The place was a beehive of activity. Holy Mother of God, Shane blurted out without even realizing it. His gaze moved to the mansion, assessing the damage. A part of the roof had sunken, while some parts of the walls had bent or collapsed. It was quite a sight. Oh my God, Chris gasped. This is a disaster. Out of the corner of his eyes, he thought he saw someone oddly familiar, which indeed turned out to be true when he discovered it was one of their people disguised as a paramedic. He subtly gestured for her to come over, which she readily obeyed. State, Chris ordered as soon as she approached him. Skyla Thunder, Level 3, Hunter's League, she announced with a low tone, enough for the both men to pick up her words. Shane snorted. By the side, the council sent an ordinary Level 3 agent to come investigate this case? He jibed. The girl's expression faltered for a slight moment, but she was quick to compose herself. I'm sorry, Senior, for failing to meet your expectations, but you have to make do with me, Skyla apologized with her head slightly bowed. Even though her words sounded sincere, Shane couldn't help but feel she was mocking him. He wanted to retort back, but Chris was quick to interfere. What's your findings so far? Chris asked. Skyla turned towards the ruined mansion. According to the kids' report, they claim it's some sort of earthquake accompanied with a deafening scream that overwhelms the auditory system. She scrupulously summarized her findings. And you, what do you think? Shane threw the unexpected question at her, and though she was a bit taken aback, she was quick to reply. After a long contemplation, I narrowed the suspects down to 2 people, witches and vampires. Chris crossed his arm and rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Yes, it seems only both creatures are capable of such immensity of destruction, but you're missing something. Chris assessed, and the girl's eyes lit up with curiosity. He continued, according to the student's narration, you claim they heard a deafening wail. Yes, Senior, she answered. Only a vampire with a sonic scream or a banshee would be able to pull this off effortlessly. Witches might try, but a spell of this extent would tear the user apart, Shane explained, this time surprising Skyla. He decided to become useful tonight after all. Hallelujah, she thought. But the highest suspect is a vampire. Banshees are known to wail, but theirs aren't lethal, Shane continued while the girl nodded in understanding. So we're looking for a vampire with a sonic cry ability, Chris concluded, his eyes taking in the scene. Which of the Garcias was available at the time of the incident? Shane questioned while Chris' eyes checked out the mansion. Caroline Garcia. She was the one who organized the party, the CCTVs, said Chris as he pointed at one of the cameras mounted at the entrance of the mansion. Did you check them? Well, began Skyla, I did check, but the cameras were damaged beyond repair, and the few functioning ones has all their footages erased. I couldn't salvage anything. Chris pinched the space between his brows with a tired sigh. This is more complicated than I thought. What about Caroline? Shane asked. Her case was serious, so she was taken to the hospital. Most of the students in critical condition were as a result of the stampede that occurred during the incident, Skyla added, but I did get something from her. The 2 men faced her simultaneously, interest piqued. What did she say? The girl scratched her scalp awkwardly, their gaze was intense and unsettling. Well, she kept muttering 2 names. What name? Shane asked tartly. Alexa and Linda. The plan failed. She needed to get away was her only thought as she struggled to reach the door, but the students' shoving kept thwarting her plans. She had managed to escape from the basement and stumbled into the living room. Disoriented, she blinked to clear the haze from her gaze. This was all Caroline's fault, she warned her. Her ears were hurting and her head was pounding like crazy. The migraine was terrible, not to mention her legs. It was soft like jelly and she feared it would give out without warning. Just as she feared, her knees buckled and she was falling. But just before she reached the ground, a hand wrapped around her waist securely, steadying and pressing her to his body. I need to escape, she slurred, and too weak to fight her way out of the stranger's arm. Don't worry, you're in safe hands, he said when he sensed her resistance. Hearing his assurance, Alexa passed out at once. Unfortunately, failing to recognize the sinister smirk tugging at the stranger's lips. There was an odd gleam in the boy's eyes. Soon Little Town will know what they're harboring, he thought, and carried her away. Linda might not be as outspoken as Caroline and Alexa, but she was definitely smart. Her friends have failed, which means they would come looking for her. It all happened in a flash. One moment they were all having fun and the next, all hell was let loose. She hadn't gone into the basement with the others cause she was given a different assignment: keep Ben busy. Truthfully, it wasn't a difficult task since the guy was already wasted, but he would wake groggily from time to time, asking about his goddess or something. She couldn't exactly tell. But she was a smart girl, so she kept him distracted and busy until the incident occurred. She had been the first to escape before anyone else could reach the door. Linda knew it wasn't a coincidence. The house began to quake the moment her friends went to have a bit of fun with the girl. Something must have gone wrong, something must have happened. So she ran to her packed car and brought the engine to life, not minding the scream assaulting her ears. She had to survive. She had managed to successfully escape the Garcia's manor and was currently driving over the speed limit, hoping to reach her place in time with the intention of packing a few of her stuffs and leave Little Town before anything happens. The night was so foggy and chilly that even with her headlights on, she still had limited visibility. Linda swallowed nervously. The moonlight gleamed mysteriously, casting eerie shadows on the tree-lined avenue. The uncanny atmosphere spooked her so much that even though the night was cold, she was perspiring to the extent her hands were clammy from fright. Because her thoughts were all over the place, she abruptly screeched her car to a halt when she discovered there was a figure standing in the middle of the road. Thanks to the backlash, Linda bumped her face on the steering wheel and moaned in pain. Pulling back her hair that covered her face like a waterfall, she gazed out on the road only to realize the figure she almost hit was still standing there, unfazed. Her blood suddenly ran cold. She was no fool. Just like Caroline, she had an idea of the supernatural, though she wasn't a founding family. And judging from the figure's conspicuous and weird dressing, Linda bet she was here for her. Linda couldn't make out the figure's full face but definitely saw her lips moving. My God, she gasped a witch, but before she reacted, the car door was magically ripped open and she was forcefully flung out of the car only to land right in front of the mysterious figure. Linda's eyes widened in shock and her chest moved up and down faster as her breath quickened. She crawled backward with her hands, but the woman said something and an invisible force held her still. Her blood chilled. She was definitely doomed. The woman pulled her hood away, revealing red blazing hair which shimmered under the moonlight, and squat down, her eyes resting on hers. So it's you guys, she said and grabbed Linda's chin, turning her face from side to side like a potential buyer examining the goods to purchase. It's not me, she managed to say. Really? The woman queried interestedly. Who then? Linda lit up at once. Maybe there was a chance for redemption. It's all Caroline and Alexa's fault. She started. I warned them but they didn't listen. I was only forced into it. Please believe me, she confessed with a pitiful expression, not caring if the details were hyped. Her life was on the line here. The lady said with an amused expression before she burst into a loud, ringing fit of laughter which Linda herself awkwardly joined. But after a while the laughter gurgled to a halt and the woman's gaze turned ice cold. All smiles dissipated from her face as she spat. Do you know what I hate the most? Linda nodded sideways stiffly. She continued. People who abandon their comrades in the face of persecution, she gritted. Though you guys somehow ruined my plans tonight, but I was willing to just erase your memories. Try being merciful for once, but now I've changed my mind." The lady stood to her feet, a burning anger present in her eyes. "You can rot in hell." Then she began to say words Linda couldn't understand. Ut tenebris lux toi, guide ad mortem. But Linda knew instinctively she was casting a spell and tried to escape, but it was too late. She couldn't move a muscle. Suddenly Linda began to move, but it wasn't of her own accord. It was if her body movement were under another person's control. Dread filled her. She felt like a puppet being played under one's string. Before Linda knew it, she began to walk back to her car while the figure stood watching, pleased at the aftermath. Linda frantically screamed at her body to take back the control, but all her efforts were futile. Soon, she started the engine and started driving, but the car was careering off course. Linda didn't know how long she traveled, but she started screaming her lungs out the moment her car ventured deeper into the coastal road. She was a native of little towns, so she particularly recognized this curved highway. It led down to a cliff towering some 2,000 feet above the crystal-clear glacial lakes and stretching over 3 miles in length. A feeling of horror and dread of death seized her the moment her car slid off the cliff. Before she could react, not that she could do anything anyway since she was still under the strange hold. The car tumbled, bounced, and hit against ragged rocks before her surroundings blurred into light and shadows, and she felt the sickening sensation of falling off the cliff. Her car plunged deep into the chilly water, making her lungs ache while the mysterious hold on her dissipated. Terror drove her to ignore the pain on her head and stomach, nor did it give her a great deal of relief to know she finally had control over her own body and will. Thankfully, she was grateful she was still conscious after impact, since water was an incompressible fluid and hitting it at high speed was analogous to driving into a concrete wall. Linda immediately calmed down. She had to plan her escape, knowing fully her best chance of escape was the first 30 to 120 seconds. Gallons of water began filling her car, but she chose not to panic, aware it will be very difficult to open the door due to water pressure once underwater. So she slung her head back, filling her lungs with air. Because the engine was still running and had electrical power, she rolled down the window but was hit with a flood of water cause the waterline was past the window. Determinedly, she was able to swim out. Pushing off the car, she swarmed to the surface and inhaled a lungsful of fresh cold breath. Linda was a good swimmer, so she was sure of making it to the shore. Unknown to her, the mysterious figure stood above the cliff watching everything that transpired with interest. Fine, since the girl was like an annoying bedbug that refuses to die, she would let her live after taking away her memories. Ben groaned, his body was aching all over as if he was just dug out of a subterranean pit. Water, he moaned and stretched forth his hands expectantly. He knew it was morning judging from the sunlight hitting his face, and habitually at his place, the housekeeper always made sure to be present to serve him a glass of water whenever he rouses from sleep. As expected, he felt a solid weight on the inside of his palm and grabbed it. Lifting his head up a bit, he brought the cup to his lips. But he spat the liquid out the moment it touched his tongue, and his sleepy eye snapped open at once. "What the foo?" His voice trailed off the moment he recognized the figure standing before him. Chalky skin, face more handsome than his, most girls' heartthrob, Dan. But Ben moaned aloud, holding his head as memories of the past night hit him hard. He hates hangovers. Ben's eyes widened at once when he remembered everything. Linda, that fox. He cursed as he began evaluating yesterday's events. Suddenly he stiffened. Where was Leah? Where was his goddess? My goddess, where are you? He wailed internally. Don't worry, your goddess is fine, Dan assured him after hearing his piped chattering in his head. Really? Asked Ben excitedly while Dan simply nodded. But where is she? Ben mused. She's in safe hands, he added. A different safe hands. Okay, Ben breathed but suddenly froze. All the guest ions, Dan answered. He had not asked any aloud. He turned to face Dan with horror printed clearly all over his face. Could he read my thoughts? Oh yes, I've been reading your mind, Dan confirmed. Contrary to what Dan expected, Ben's face lit up with excitement. No way, shut up. He expressed his shock. Then he suddenly sprang up, startling Dan and almost stumbling off the bed in the process. This is impossible. Though Leah told me you were a vampire with teleportation ability, but she never told me you were a telepath. How awesome! But how is that possible? How do you balance both powers? Ben effused all in one clean breath while Dan mentally facepalmed. What was he expecting, babysitting this nerd? Tell me, how does it feel having such amazing abilities? How do you manage the both? Does it overwhelms you sometimes? Ben peppered him with questions. Oh yes, your questions are overwhelming me right now, Dan responded with a straight face when the boy wouldn't stop prodding him. Ben was almost jumping up and down while urging him to answer his question. Get back before you become my meal, he warned when the boy got too close for his liking. The result was effective cause Ben stepped back. He could still vividly remember the pain of having a fang sunk into his neck. Sit, Dan commanded, and the guy plunked down on the edge of the bed while he grabbed a chair and sat down, making sure to observe a distance of 5 meters. Now ask. As soon as Ben opened his mouth, about to gush over him, Dan added one after the other. There was a sulky expression on Ben's face, but half-breed was better than none, so he complied with the rules. Why do you have 2 abilities? As expected, Dan mused. Every vampire from the Nicoli clan possesses double abilities. Next, he answered curtly. Ben frowned. Dan's answer barely satisfied him, but he would have to make do with that. I already know Asher controls the elements. What's his second? None of your business. Next, Dan put in before he could even finish his question. Ben furrowed his brows, face set in a deep frown. This wasn't doing him any good. In fact, it made him more hungry for answers. How do you balance both powers? Years of practice and experience. Next, which of your abilities do you prefer the most? My teleportation ability. You don't know how annoying and disturbing it is reading people's thoughts every day, he answered with a bit of details, this time surprising Ben. Would Leah have double abilities too? Ben questioned this time, his ears perked up reading for juicy gossip. This time Dan didn't answer quickly as he did to the others. Instead, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I don't know what the girl is, so I can't tell if she would possess a double ability, but judging from the level of destruction she caused yesterday at Caroline's PAR. What destruction? Ben interrupted with a confused expression. Right, Dan remembered. As funny as it sounds, but Ben was so schnackered that he slept through the chaos yesterday. The guy was so damn lucky that upon the stampede that occurred and the flying debris, not even a strand of hair on his body was touched until he was rescued by Dan. As if his senses returned, Ben touched his pants, feeling for something. My cell phone? Cell phone? Yes, I need it. He said, searching his body frantically. Is there any solid reason you need it desperately? Yes. He snapped, still searching. I record and write down all my paranormal thesis, findings, and experiences in there, including Leah's. Dan chilled before he spat. You did what? Well, it was therapeutic and my own way of dealing with all this craziness, Ben said defensively. He shivered when he met Dan's murderous gaze, and the guy looked like he would throttle him anytime soon, so he quickly salvaged what's left of the situation. But let's look on the bright side, he began. You said there was a stampede last night. The kids could have stomped it into bits, or it could be lying at a corner of the house waiting to be picked by one of the council's people who are currently raiding the mansion in the name of investigation as we speak, Dan countered frustratedly. Or one of the docky or brawny kids at school could have picked it up during the pandemonium and currently has no clue how to unlock my multiple phone securities. Dan slowly closed in on Ben menacingly while the poor guy leaned backward until his back touched the bed. Let's just pray you're right, else. Ben gulped. He didn't need to guess the words after the else, it was quite obvious he just hoped his theory was right. He knew it was dangerous to take her to his pack, but he had no choice. Though the virus doesn't affect human, but judging from what he saw last night, he couldn't tell what she was anymore. Daniel's brows furrowed as he entered into a deep thought. What is the girl actually? He had somehow thought she was a werewolf. He believed she was mauled to death by a werewolf, which was why he lost connection with her initially, thinking she had died without knowing she was alive and going through phasing. But he was totally wrong. What he saw her do was beyond the capability of a werewolf. Though 1 out of 1,000 werewolf do possess such gift and were called gifted werewolves, but theirs wasn't as lethal as the powers the girl exhibited last night. The powers he knew few gifted werewolves possess were clairvoyance, and this set of werewolves were famously called the Werseers, followed by empathy, and animal communion. This 3 major powers was what the gifted werewolves possess, and different gifted wers manifest slight variation of it. But no werewolf has ever been heard of or seen tearing down a building with a scream, nor to talk of creating a force field that took tremendous energy to take down. Truth be told, he was terrified and still terrified right now. Daniel hated being kept in the dark, and that scares him the most. He seriously thought his head was going to explode from thinking too much. He curiously stared down at the girl lying beside him on his bed. Regarding her slowly, he began to study her features. Even though she wasn't chalky white, but she was much paler than he initially thought. Was it her natural skin color or as a result of the stress from last night? He couldn't tell. Though her eyes were shut close in sleep, but he had imprinted the color of her eyes earlier in his mind. While his eyes was a medium dark shade of cyan, her own was a shade of blue ranging between azure and a darker sky blue. He took in her breath and his inner wolf went into a joyful frenzy, growling mate, in his head. Daniel smiled, even his beast already took a liking to her. Well, that was expected, she was their mate after all. He loved her sweet and strong scent, chocolate vanilla with a hint of peppermint, and his senses became saturated quickly by her scent, to the extent his wolf started a mad fit. Mark her, mate with her, make her ours, it raved in his head, but Daniel ignored him. Thankfully he had much control over his wolf, so it couldn't force him to do anything against his will. He gathered her warm body in his arms and smoothed away the curls that clung to her face, instinctively placing his head on the nook of her neck, only to realize the girl had a wolf smell. His eyes widened. She did carry her own distinct wolf smell. The girl was indeed a werewolf. But what was going on? This discovery made him more confused. All werewolves have a scent of wolf, and with each werewolf there is a different scent and a base pack scent, which is how the Wers recognize their pack members and intruders. But the joy didn't last for long, cause his nostrils picked up another scent on her that made his nose crinkle. The odd scent was entwined with her wolf scent and was much stronger, familiar yet nauseating and infuriating vampires. Daniel sprang up from the bed as if struck by lightning, a look of shock and disbelief on his face. He didn't know what to feel or think anything, everything was just confusing. As if on cue, he received a message through the Pact's mind link. Asher was here. Daniel swallowed hard, jaw clenched tightly, fists formed, eyes darkened and anger rippling through him. Asher knew all along. Daniel tore out of his room and strode towards the living room with burning fury in his eyes. Even some of the Pact members who greeted him along the way couldn't help but shrink back when they saw their alpha reeking of anger. Once he arrived, without warning, a punch that made him falter met Asher on the face. Asher's face snapped to the side, a bruise forming there immediately, but it healed it up as soon as it came. Unknowingly, the healing action infuriated Daniel more, cause he held Asher by the collar and began to rain blows on him until he was beaten to a pulp. He poured out all his frustration and anger on the vampire, who surprisingly took the blows without an ounce of resistance. Daniel's fist was bleeding, but Asher's face was in a more sorry state, but as usual, it began to heal effortlessly. Unsatiated and realizing his intentions of inflicting pain on Asher was playing the fool, he let go of the vampire's collar and tossed him to the ground. "Judging from your welcome, I can guess you've figured out the truth," Asher said, wiping away the blood on the corner of his almost healed-up lips with his hand. "What did you do to her?" Daniel growled at the unfazed vampire. "I didn't do anything to her, you moron," he jibed at Daniel's short-sightedness. He swiftly stood to the feet, wiping invisible dirts from his butt. "Like I believe you," Daniel stated with a sneer. "Believe me or not, it's none of my business." Asher shook his head sympathetically and said, "I wonder how you've been able to rule this pack when you're this narrow-minded. I don't have time to play games with you. Now, tell me why she's like that?" Daniel asked straightforwardly. Asher looked him straight in the eye. "It's dangerous to tell you anything here, cause I'm not sure how secured your pack is from the council's spices, but all I can tell you is, the girl is something that shouldn't exist." Daniel cast a deep frown, though he doesn't trust Asher, but judging from the severity of the situation, he could tell the vampire wasn't pulling his legs. "Fine, we'll set up a meeting place then," he reluctantly suggested. "Fine by me, but you have to return the girl home soon. I might have tied up all loose ends, but it'll draw suspicion if she doesn't return soon." Asher pretended not to have caught the way Daniel's face fell when he heard his statement. Why was he bothered? His rival was sad because his mate, their mate, was leaving him. "Take these," Asher said, and tossed 2 blood bags he brought out from a nylon bag resting on one of the alpha's couch. Daniel caught the items fluidly, but his face wrinkled in disgust the moment he realized what he was holding. "Trust me, she's going to need that when she wakes up." "It's vampire blood," Asher assured him upon noticing the displeased expression on his face. Daniel mocked. "Yeah, of course. Your disgusting food, vampire blue?" Unfortunately, his speech trailed off at the end when he just realized what Asher said. "The vampire blood." He stuttered wide-eyed. He turned to question the vampire, but Asher was already at the door, about to leave, so he swallowed his questions. Asher grabbed the doorknob and paused. He slowly turned and said to Daniel, "I bought you some time, return the girl home tomorrow. Daniel wanted to say something but the guy zoomed off before he could mutter a word. He snorted, show off. Who even wanted his help? Leah had a dream. In that dream, she wanted the world to burn, felt the need to wrap and envelope everyone and everything with pain. She wanted all to rot in hell, but that was until a light appeared. She couldn't remember his face, but her inside screamed with excitement. It was as if he was the only cure to her madness. Still asleep, Leah moaned in delight when her hands caressed something soft and hairy. It felt warm and comfy to the touch. With a languished smile, she stirred and cuddled into it, but it was ridiculously large that her hands couldn't reach its other end, so she just lazily dropped her hand on its hairy belly. Her hand stroked its belly, realizing how long and thick the hairs were. In fact, it felt more like furs. Suddenly, it released a deep satisfied purr and Leah's eyes snapped open at once, only to meet face to face with a dog. No, scratch that, a wolf. Ah! Her screams reverberated throughout the room as she stood abruptly, faltered, stumbled and fell off the queen-sized bed, while the wolf, obviously roused from his sleep by her scream, took off. Leah continued her screams and internal raves. Where am I? Why was I in bed with a wolf? What is going on? What's with situation? Where's everyone? Where's Ben? Ah, the party. Wait, the party. Leah's countenance changed at once. She immediately remembered everything, Caroline's games and tricks, the pain and torture she went through in her hands. Anger surged through her, and without realizing it, her fist began to curl up, but someone interrupted her. Hi! A guy stuck out his head through the doorway while the rest of his body was hidden outside. Hi! Leah responded warily. I'm sorry for scaring you earlier. My wolf can be naughty at times, he said, scratching his head awkwardly and finally moving out of the shadows. Don't worry about. Leah froze upon realizing what he just said. Did he just say wolf? Her eyes widened. You're a werewolf. She choked. Leah didn't know how to feel at all. She was feeling a roller coaster of emotions, shock, confusion, curiosity, and excitement. It was her first time seeing a werewolf in reality, and not just a made-up character in some fictional movie, but a real breathing werewolf. Moreover, it was also refreshing actually talking to a different creature, judging from the fact she's being surrounded by witches and vampires this past weeks. Also, she felt a sort of kinship with him, judging from the fact she was half vampire and half werewolf. So you're trying to say you're really a werewolf, a real werewolf? Leah queried earnestly, as if trying to confirm he was not playing a prank on her. Of course, baby girl, you saw me on the bed moments ago, remember? He tried to convince her. Ah yes, how could she forget that grey fur wolf with silver tips? But she blushed scarlet red upon hearing him call her baby girl. Leah looked up and couldn't help but check out the guy. Strange enough, he looked oddly familiar, but she couldn't exactly put her finger on where she had seen him. He had this sweet exotic smell, which made Leah's heart stir and her throat to dry up. Why was she feeling this way? His long voluminous blonde hair provided her with just the right temptation. She felt the burning need to run her hands through that messy silky hair and tousle it to her satisfaction. The desire was so strong that she had to dig her nails into the inside of her palm to keep herself alert and sober. She eyed his muscular build. The guy was handsome, sea blue eyes and sharp, angular features with the right amount of stubbles, giving him a matured vibe. He was wearing a simple collared shirt, snug enough to pronounce his physique and left open at the neck, revealing a bit of his chest and slacks that hung his lean hips. Leah's cheek burned when her eyes unknowingly traveled to his crotch and lean thighs and face palm internally. Why was she feeling this way? The only person she had ever felt this particular way for was Asher. But why? Why was this guy's presence overwhelming and tormenting her? As if fate was playing a crude joke on her, Leah looked up only to discover he was standing right in front of her. Her breath quickened and she had a hard time breathing. The attraction she felt for this guy was so strong that she fought the urge to place her hands on that firm chest and discover if he was affected the same way she was. "Daniel," he said, stretching forth his hand for a handshake. Leah eyed his hand warily. "Should I? Or should I not?" She pondered. She was having a bad feeling about this. "Leah," she finally said, and reluctantly accepted the handshake, but gasped when electricity coursed through her hand. Startled, she jerked her hand back and wondered if he felt that too. But his face was blank, she couldn't pick up any emotion. "How did I get here? Why am I here?" Leah asked when an awkward silence began to reign. "I was the guy who knocked you out before you tore down the whole building," he explained without hesitation. Leah scowled, rubbing the back of her head as if reliving that moment. If not for her great regeneration ability, she would be nursing a concussion by now. He really struck her hard. No wonder he looked familiar earlier, he was the guy from her dream. "You should have let me destroy that mansion, at least pay that piece in her own coin," she fumed without thinking. "And let you trap, possibly kill innocent souls, hey?" he argued. Leah realized how stupid she sounded. Would she accomplish revenge on the cost of innocent lives? No. "I'm sorry," she apologized. "I spoke without thinking." She bowed her head, embarrassed. "It's all right, the werewolf gene in you is partially causing you to think that way." Her head jerked up. "How did you know that?" she asked, astounded. "Because I'm your mate." She had always thought Asher was pushing her away by claiming he wasn't her mate. But it seems he wasn't lying after all. Unfortunately, how she felt for Asher was something totally out of this world. It was fiery, consuming and worth it. She wouldn't even mind giving up her life for him. His existence alone occupied her thoughts. Yes, she had a boyfriend from same grade back at her old school, but whatever they had back then was child's play compared to this. She just felt like Asher was her other missing part, the bone of her bone, her soulmate, and she felt it deep down. But then, fate was trying to play a crude joke on her. My mate?" she stuttered, eyes wide and incredulous. "Yes." He nodded. "I'm sorry for dropping this on you like this. I didn't plan for us to meet this way." Leah was numb. She didn't know what to feel anymore. Shock? Disbelief? Anger? Frustration? None. She wavered. "Are you sure it's me? Aren't you mistaken?" Leah stressed. Daniel smiled. He could see the doubt in her eyes. "Wild wolves are naturally monogamous creatures who mate for life, and because we're half the animal, we adopted that same attribute. But we're half human too, so some werewolves become very selective, exclusive lovers, and others are more polygamous, which often depends on their human lifestyle. Moreover, I am my wolf, and I imprinted on you the first day you came into Little Town," he explained as the girl squinted her eyes and thought, "Wait a minute, you're that wolf my mom almost hit?" Leah questioned with shock. "Yes," he confirmed. Leah raked her hand through her silky wavy hair, her thoughts all over the place. She had never forgotten that particular wolf. The way it stared at her that very day as if it could see through her soul made her shudder and had left a mark on her mind. Leah was just too confused and overwhelmed that she had failed to recognize it earlier. How does the mates know they're the chosen ones for the shifter? Leah queried curiously, looking him straight in the eye. Daniel too didn't take his eyes off her as he started. It's quite simple, you know, he smiled. For beginners, you would like the way he smells. Leah chilled, she did find his scent intensively alluring. You can't take your eyes off them. Has she been staring at him all this while? Because mates are your destined soulmates, they're very possessive of each other. Leah came to a startling realization. She wouldn't stand another woman laying hands on him. They feel tingles and sparks when they touch. Leah definitely felt that, and by the look on his face, she could now tell he felt that too. Because this someone's ingrained into your soul, you begin to have very strong, often uncontrollable cravings, throughout your entire body. Daniel explained with a whisper-like voice and stepped closer. He continued, we call it the mating fever, but it's literally just an intense desire felt because of the strong attraction between the two. The war creatures are naturally more in tune with their instincts than other creatures, which is why, the more you fight the fever, the stronger it gets until everything erupts. So in one word, he was trying to say, they literally wouldn't be able to keep their hands off each other. Leah mused. Yes, she had to admit, she was insanely attracted to this hot werewolf that claims to be her mate, notwithstanding all the evidence points to that too. But that didn't change the way she felt for Asher. Though it might not sound exaggerated as the werewolf explains on his own part, but she feels sparks whenever she and Asher touches. She hates the way other female students and teachers stare at him at school. She can't even stand what they're probably thinking. Also, she can't take her mind off him and wouldn't mind being possessive of him. Finally, she doesn't care, but she's definitely lusting after him. Leah was brought back to reality when she felt the tip of Daniel's nose run just over her neck, not quite touching it but right up to the back of her ear. He took it in her scent, as if it was addictive, committing it to memory and fueling the desire already building inside him, but he flinched suddenly. Though Leah wanted to fight against this sudden invasion, but her body was the one in control until she felt him stiffen. Though he made an attempt to hide it, but she caught utter disgust written on his unshaven face. Her eyes widened and her hands instinctively dove down to her neck, where she let out a long sigh of relief upon noticing the tear-dropped necklace was still tucked safely inside her top. Even though she didn't know much about Daniel, but judging from the fictional movies and books she had watched and read, she knew werewolves and vampires were natural enemies. It was probably hard for him to cope with the fact his mate was half the creature they were destined to loathe. How did you know I'm a hybrid? Leah asked, surprised. He looked up, and though he looked tense he still managed to post a smile. Your scent, but this necklace masks my scent. How did you? I'm your mate, he curtly replied, but Leah felt he was hiding more details from her. Pulling it out, Leah ran her hands over the teardrop necklace. Absent-mindedly she missed Asher. It was stupid, very stupid of her to think of another guy when she was with her real mate. Even Asher acknowledged him. But she couldn't help it. Suddenly an idea struck her. What if Asher was her mate too? Her eyes shone. Oh my God! Maybe that was why she felt that way for him too? No, this is stupid, she sighed. Dan even told her it was impossible to have two mates. Moreover, if he was truly her mate, why was Daniel the one that rescued her and not him? You guys can glare as much as you want, but I'm not letting my brother out until you guys tell me what you are up to. Shizukai stood her ground with arms folded stubbornly while Ben facepalmed and Dan groaned. Dan knew how difficult it was for him to track down this idiot and teleport him here, all because of Ben, but unfortunately his sister took over. We need him for something important, Ben said with a pleading expression. I can help out only if you tell me what you're dragging my brother into, she still insisted. Dan rubbed his hand on his face. He hated bickerings the most cause it heightened the intensity of voices in his head. Since everyone tend to be loud now, would be the right time to switch off his telepathic ability. He wants your brother to track down an object for him, Dan spilled, pointing at Ben. Ben threw his hands up with an exasperated sigh. What object? She questioned, a curious gleam in her eyes. A cell phone that contains vital information about us, Dan answered. She could wait till Asher hears that, she said in a tone that clearly implied that Asher was going to skin the poor boy alive. Ben cringed. He'll kill me, which won't happen if we find the cell phone first, Dan countered. Fine then, Zukai agreed. Where's the cell phone? Ben muttered and searched his pocket before pulling out a drawing sheet and placed it on the bed. Zukai raised a brow as she went through the drawing. The boy had etched a real-life Samsung Galaxy S20. The drawing was so graphic and detailed that she couldn't help but marvel at his skill. But what was she to do with this? She picked the sheet, asking, "What's this for?" "I know," started Ben. "Your brother has psychometry and I was wondering, you want my brother to track your cell phone through this drawing?" she interjected. Yes, Ben nodded. She gave him a funny look. What? She shook her head. You're so adorable and stupid, Zukai jibed at his foolishness. Ben's face twitched. He didn't know whether to take her comment as a compliment or insult. I'm sorry, but my brother's power doesn't work that way, she stated firmly. You see, my brother through touch gains knowledge of an object, sometimes including the makers, users, and even those who have on passing used the object, and what has been done with it. This is achieved because each object contains residual information of the object or person which he can now trace through clairsentient contact. She waved the sheet in her hand in a ridiculous manner and continued her explanation. But what you're asking him to do is simply unachievable. Moreover, that drawing now contains your residue since you touched it, and even if he does trace it, it would surely lead back to you. Definitely, told the idiot, but he wouldn't listen. Dan smirked. Ben protested. At least I tried. Yeah, you indeed did. Sassy Dan with a huge scowl on his face. Then before Ben's eyes, Zukai began to transform. The previous blue-haired voluptuous lady immediately disappeared and a tall, burly, blue-haired gorgeous guy began to form her brother. Oh my god, Ben gasped, though Dan had told him that the both were chimeric twins, but he didn't give it much thoughts. But seeing their transformation up close and live, it was awe-inspiring and totally unbelievable to the extent his eyes almost bulged out of its socket while his jaw dropped. But what shocked Ben the most was their ability to retain the clothing each was wearing upon manifestation. Did their clothes seep into their skin or something? But just as Ben was about to ask, Dan pressed his finger tightly against his lips with a warning gaze that says, "Say a word and I'm done with you." Ben sulked. He refused to believe he was that predictable, but there was nothing he could do. He just hoped they find the cell phone on time. My sister filled me in on everything. Who's the guy that Asher is going to skin? Zukai asked as soon as he took over his body. He won't die cause we're already making plan on recovering the cell phone, Dan countered, and then, gestured towards Ben. Prompted, Ben explained, I think a student must have picked up my cell phone before the stampede. I lost consciousness before the whole chaos began and must have dropped it then. So you want me to trace all of them? Zukai prodded. Probably. We are going to begin with the hospital since most students were admitted, and using that opportunity, investigate and figure out which students left before the stampede and those who've been discharged from the hospital already. Ben suggested, handling the sheet to Zukai, who committed the drawing to his memory. Let's go then, Dan said and placed his hand on their shoulder, and next they found themselves in the hospital's restroom. Ben and Zukai raised a brow when they discovered they were inside the men's toilet. Sorry, Dan smiled bashfully. This is what happens when I have a vague description of where we're heading to. He scratched his head awkwardly. Ben was relieved. Thankfully it wasn't the ladies' toilet. No one was using the urinary and the few men available were stuck in the toilet cubicle doing their business, so no one saw them come out of nowhere, else the vampires would have knocked them out. Without wasting time, they all left for their diverse missions. Zukai went to go steal a doctor's coat which would help camouflage his intentions, since it'll be weird going around and touching students. Since Ben and Dan were already students, they didn't need to disguise themselves and went straight to the hospital ward. It wasn't hard to locate the students thanks to their loud and endless chatterings, not to take of the females' excited shrieks when Dan stepped into the 8-bed ward. There was an indirect wall-mounted unit above each bed with 3 9W compact fluorescent lamps, while the curtains separating each beds were pulled back. Ben remained invisible in their eyes while they rushed at Dan, who had this dry look on his face as if he would teleport right in front of everybody anytime soon. Dan felt like crying. Why were these kids staring at him with twinkling eyes? No, he can't take this. He needs to leave. He turned around helplessly, but the glare from Ben redirected his footsteps, and the next he knew, his arms was open, welcoming the girls who rushed into it. Oh my God, it's really Dan, he's so cute. I must make sure to hug him well. This might be my last opportunity to get close to him. It's Dan. Oh my God, it's Dan. I can't breathe. Somebody, tell me to breathe. Why is he so hot? Look at those eyes, nose, face. God is really unfair, but who cares? I need to make him mine. Dan. Dan. Geez, why are this pest hugging him before me? I must somehow find a way to get close to him. It's Dan. Can I hug him? Should I hug him? What if he snobs me? I'm not as spoken and beautiful as the other girls. What should I do? Dan thought his head would explode from reading their high-pitched and endless chattering. He had thought reading their mind would give him an edge, a clue on how to handle them, but he was totally wrong. It made him all the more scared and nervous, though he hid it perfectly. All everyone could see on his face was a smoldering smile. Only Ben knew the facade was on the verge of cracking. Dan felt like a human surrounded by sharks in the open blue sea and was about to be devoured. Well, their thoughts were all the same except for the last one. Dan stared at the girl. She was wearing huge framed glasses and seemed to be fidgeting with her hands, internally conflicted. Why was she so nervous to hug him? He was the nervous one here. He'll rather be out there settling clan disputes and hunting down rogue vampires than sitting here, entertaining girls he was 100 times their age. Dan sized her up. He does remember seeing her once or twice in class, but each time their gazes meet accidentally, she would look away hastily and will let her hair fall over her face like a curtain. Oh, She is a shy type. Dan tried to remember her name but couldn't since all his attentions were always fixed on Leah in class, making the other students fade into the background. So he tried to see if he could pick her name from the other girls' thoughts, and sure enough, he succeeded. Why is Quinn staring at Dan that way? Does she thinks Dan would spare her a look? Oh please, go look in the mirror. Hi Quinn. Dan waved at the girl who was about to leave for her bed. Her eyes widened and her lips trembled. She stared at him dumbfounded. He knows my name. Oh my god! He knows me! Literally jumping up and down. God, he knows me! Dan heard the girl's inner prattle and smiled. By the time he was able to calm and settle the girls, Zukai no scratch that, Dr. Zukai had already arrived, and funny enough, he was wearing a black wig, making Dan wonder where he got that from. But it was perfect since it was rare seeing a blue-haired doctor around and would arouse suspicion. Zukai carried a medical chart while checking a patient's infusion stand and for drip, touching the person all he wanted in the process while asking questions like, "How do you feel? Does your head hurt? Ear? Where does it hurt exactly? Don't worry, the nurses would attend to you as soon as possible." "You weren't at the party?" asked one of the guys who was sitting on his hospital bed, whom immediately bumped fists with Dan. "Nay, got a lot of stuff to take care of last night," Dan replied when he saw Ben gesturing at him to start up a conversation with the boy. Ben himself was making conversation with Quinn. Guess she was the only person willing to talk to him without snubbing him. "You missed a lot," the boy said. "The party was a blast even though it got ruined in the end by an earthquake." "Earthquake?" Dan frowned. "Yeah," the boy sighed. "The Earth's vibration ruined the party that night, that's what the police say." Oh, Dan realized. That was the excuse the council was using to cover the incident. They said it was a 5.0 magnitude earthquake. Another boy whose own bed was beside them chimed in. "But I heard there was screaming, a high-pitched haunting wail that affected a lot of students' olfactory systems." Dan knowingly asked, wanting to know what excuse the council must have used to cover up this one. "Oh, about that," the first boy scratched his head awkwardly. "The police was here earlier. They think a student must have messed around with the Garcia's sound system as some sort of prank, which unfortunately was amplified by the unexpected earthquake," he explained while Dan listened with rapt attention. "The police is now investigating everyone who attended the party." Dan inwardly applauded. The council was smart indeed, they covered everything up perfectly. But he hoped Leah would be able to make it home in time before the police comes to her doorstep. It would be strange if she isn't back by the time they chose to investigate her, which was inevitable. Everyone had seen her at the party. "Talking of which, did you hear about Caroline?" Dan's ear perked up. "What about her?" "She has sensorineural hearing loss," the boy disclosed, and this time even Ben's attention was attracted. "What is sensorineural?" "A hearing loss caused by damage to the inner ear or the nerve from the ear to the brain, which in her case was caused by prolonged exposure to loud noise and can be treated but not cured," Zukai explained with overflowing confidence, walking towards them, his movement effortlessly suave and cool. Immediately, all of the girls turned to stare at him, and they automatically released astonished gasp while he winked at them and his mouth slid into a lopsided smile. "Someone should hold me!" a girl exclaimed and dramatically fainted. Where was all this eye candy coming from? Ben facepalmed while Dan shook his head. "It seems Shizukai has been influencing her brother lately." Everyone knew Zukai was not the flirty type save his sister. "Adam, I need to check your vitals," Zukai announced with a twinkle in his eyes. But a doctor just checked on me hours ago, Adam complained, and thanks to that, Dan got to know his name. That was hours ago and I know what's best for you, unless you're questioning my capacity? Zukai asserted with this straight face that Dan would have fallen for too if he didn't know all this was a plan. No, that's not what I mean, Adam conceded at last. He immediately looked around nervously before asking in a whisper, am I going to receive a shot? Dan lifted an eyebrow. This guy was scared of injections? No, you won't, said Zukai, adjusting the boy's foredrip before ordering, let me see your hand. Dan had to admit, Zukai was so into his role that it was hard to mistake him for a fake. Adam reluctantly stretched out his hand towards him and he took it. In the guise of checking Adam's wrist, Zukai immediately used his ability, and though it was hard to concentrate, he forced himself and surprisingly caught a glimpse of what they're searching for. Once he withdrew his hands, Zukai's eyes met with Dan, and though he didn't say anything, the message was already sent through that single contact. So when am I to be discharged? Adam asked expectantly. We'll take another CT and then we'll confirm whether you're free to go or not, Zukai explained. Since Adam was one of those injured on the head during the stampede, another test. Adam scrunched up his face, but the previous doctor told me I wouldn't undergo any other test, all I just needed was a rest. Zukai froze and he stuttered, did he? Yes, and? Adam trailed off, staring at Zukai suspiciously before asking, where's your train of interns? Oh crap! Dan, whose attention was already grabbed, cursed internally. As a medical practitioner once, he remembered immediately this was a teaching hospital and it was very common that medical students, interns, and residents would be an integral part of their treatment team. Aren't medical interns supposed to be in the room and actively participate in the patient's treatment? The boy pressed, a trace of suspicion in his eyes. They're supposed to, but I decided to have a quiet time with my patient this time, don't you like that? Zukai asked, throwing the boy off balance for a moment. It was obvious Adam was conflicted, but it cleared the moment his eyes fell on the name embroidered with green on Zukai's white lab coat, ophthalmology. Alfred, Adam said aloud, and Dan stiffened. Dan's eyes narrowed and knew at once Adam has discovered Zukai was a fake. Back at school, he hardly interacted with the students save Leah, but it seems they have messed with his smart arse this time. Why's an eye doctor treating a head injury? Adam asked grimly. Dan mentally facepalm. Zukai was absolutely stupid. Doesn't he know the difference between an ophthalmologist and orthopedist? Dan was still thinking on how to salvage the situation when a nurse abruptly rushed in. Oh my God! I'm so sorry, Dr. Ed. Her eyes went to his coat. Dr. Fred, I'm so sorry for leading you into the wrong ward, she apologized, half dragging and half pushing Zukai out of the room while repeatedly bowing to the patients. What just happened? Quinn asked, stunned herself. Definitely weird, the boy beside Adam said almost immediately. The whole students fell into a simultaneous and synchronized laughter. Ben, who thought his heart was going to burst from anxiety earlier, laughed along, nervously. Dan was still shocked and tongue-tied to join in the fun. What was Sabrina doing here? And why was she disguised as a nurse? No, he has to find out. I'll be taking my leave, Dan said in one breath and zoomed off before Adam could protest. Ben mouthed a goodbye to Quinn and left right away. He didn't bother about the others, no one would miss him anyway. He soon joined Dan in the hospital hallway and they finally tracked Zukai at the hospital's exterior garden with a nurse. Who's she? Ben asked Dan curiously. It was obvious to him that the lady had helped them out, and judging from the way Dan was staring at her intensely, they seemed to know each other. My ex-girlfriend, Dan answered almost immediately without sparing him a look. Then within watchful eyes, Ben saw her mutter a few words and her nurse attire changed into a casual wear. Holy moly! Your girlfriend is a witch! Ben yelped from shock and excitement. This was the first time he was seeing a witch, oh God! A real-life witch! But Dan didn't reply him and approached the girl standing beside a large tree with Zukai. Why are you here? Dan asked with an I'm so happy to see you expression. I should be asking you the same thing? I'm here to investigate the incident on Friday, and my instinct is strongly telling me that's related to Leah, isn't it? She asked, but Dan looked away without giving her an answer. I thought so, she snorted. No wonder, your gangs are here and you should be thankful. I just saved your asses. Yes, we're thankful for saving our butts, but we're here to investigate something else, Ben disclosed while Dan scowled at him. Her brows lifted. I'm all ears. I lost my phone on that day and it contains vital information about the supernatural, and Asher would kill you, she interjected. As I've been told, Ben added repeatedly. He continued, so we decided to track down students who would be in possession of it. She put in again. Lousy speculation. What if the students aren't in possession of it? We've already made progress, Zukai countered. This time when I held Adam's hand, I saw someone asking him if there was a way to decrypt the phones without destroying the data. Ben grinned at Dan. I told you my phone is heavily guarded. Sabrina ignored the grinning idiot and asked Zukai, did you get a name? Zukai pursed his lips thoughtfully. I did hear Bryn or something. Brian, Ben corrected. Think so? Sabrina faced Ben. You know him? Yeah, Ben breathed. He lives at 66 Alewood Avenue, LT 95590, and sadly, one of my bullies. Everyone stared at Ben with unreadable looks until Dan said, cracking his neck, what are we waiting for then? Let's go get the cell phone. I'm coming along, Sabrina said. As a matter of fact, why should you? He whirled around, facing her. I might come in handy, came her excuse. No, Dan blandly refused. Yes, she insisted, and their stare-off began until Dan reluctantly gave in. Fine then, let's go, he sighed. Confirming nobody was in sight, Dan grabbed Sabrina, who was standing by his right-hand side by the waist, while Zukai held onto his shoulder and Ben held onto Zukai in return, and he teleported. But something happened. Dan didn't understand what happened at all, but all he knew was that he ended up teleporting only Sabrina while the others got left behind. Sabrina stood transfixed in shocked silence. She looked around and, just as expected, she was in Brian's corridor with Dan, but where were the others? What happened? Sabrina asked with concern while Dan kept staring at his hands inquisitively. I think I might have exhausted my powers, Dan said, trying to summon it but received nothing in return. This happens? She asked, genuinely surprised. It happens when I try to conjure and teleport to areas I don't know, sense or been to, he explained, looking at everything but her gaze. How long? Hey? For how long do you lose your power? She asked him again. Dan scratched his scalp thoughtfully. Sometimes a day or two, or some hours, but it depends on how stressed out and the degree of energy I drained myself while teleporting. Okay, she nodded and looked away, and a momentarily awkward silence reigned. Thankfully the house seemed quiet, so they had the whole apartment to search to their heart content. Nobody seems to be home. Sabrina tried to start a conversation when she couldn't take the silence any longer. He made a low sound of approval and hardly took 2 steps when he froze. What? Sabrina asked when she noticed his tensed countenance. But that was when she heard it, the creaking sound of the back door. Someone was coming in. She cursed and looked around trying to find a hiding place, but nothing stood out aside from pictures hanging on the walls. The passage was just a passage. The voices were getting louder and closer. Suddenly, she felt a tug on her hand and Dan pulled her to the nearest room, which was open and hidden by curtains. But it seems the universe was set to ruin them, cause the voices were heading their direction. Do something! Sabrina yelled. I can't do anything, no powers, remember, now you do something. Dan shouted back, I can't come up with anything, this situation has caused my brain to short-circuit and the only thing I can think of is turning both of us into birds, then we fly away, problem solved. She quietly retorted with suppressed rage. Immediately, Dan grabbed her arm and they both squeezed themselves into the large shutter door wardrobe and bolted it from behind just as the laughing couples came inside the room. The wardrobe was cramped and dark, but a few light filtered in through the space between the louvered shutters, which somehow gave them a view of what was going on outside. Sabrina had the perfect view while Dan had to crane his neck to the side in order to take a peek since he had his back against the wardrobe door. Even without looking, Sabrina knew it was a couple thanks to their conversation, but her eyes suddenly widened when she saw the boy, possibly Brian, throw the girl down on the bed, which was followed by the loud smooches. Her eyes met Dan's immediately. He might not be looking, but she knew his hearing was great. Don't tell me those kids are doing what I think they're doing, Dan whispered to her. Sabrina wanted to reply they were just making out when she heard the tearing of fabrics. Oh boy! I think they're about to do what you think they're doing, Sabrina acknowledged and saw Dan gritting his teeth and rolled her eyes. Seriously, Dan? This is the 21st century and the kids these days do this kind of stuffs, so stop being so old-fashioned. Dan wanted to argue with her, but she sent him a warning gaze, so he shut his lips at once. Sabrina curiously peered through the space when everything became quiet, and then she saw it. The girl was lying on top of Brian on the bed, stripped of her clothing while her shirt was in the process of being pushed up to her shoulders, and Brian already in his birthday suit. Then suddenly, as if a dam was broken, she sat up and began to bounce up and down on the guy's lap, and he was indeed looking enthusiastic. Do you know you look like a pervert? Dan insinuated about her staring at the couples going at it. She turned to glare at him. It's unavoidable, how was I to know I was going to be treated to free live porn, came her pathetic excuse while Dan shook his head. But don't worry, Sabrina assured they would get it over with soon, I bet 10 minutes and they're done. But 30 minutes later, she took back her words. Are this kids high on drugs, on something? She cried out, frustratedly. They were not only having sex but a torrid one. It has been quite some time now and they were not even close to the word stopping. Truth be told, it was affecting her already. The wardrobe was so cramped that both their bodies were pressed together like canned sardines, and the moan from outside, growing in strength from low whimpers of joy to shouts of ecstasy, weren't helping matters at all. Behave, she cautioned Dan when she felt his below stirred. What do you want me to do? I can't help it, he whispered helplessly, and she sighed. Her own pulse, blood pressure, and breathing were all on the rise. Who said it was easy being in a closed space with your ex? Maybe this is the time you should summon a portal and get us out of here, Dan suggested, trying his best to keep his hands to himself. I can't, it would cause a spatial disturbance, she stated. Or cause something to disrupt them, a rabbit, or snake or dragon. Geez, easy on them, Dan. Who knows, but this might be their first time and I won't want it to be traumatic but memorable for them, Sabrina pointed out, but Dan frowned. Why do I feel like you're enjoying this? Of course not, she denied. Moreover, I'm trying to prove that you can be in a confined space with me without trying anything stupid. Dan spat and she froze, eyes wide and mouth agape. She tried to speak but couldn't find the right words. Dan scoffed and craned his neck to the right, peering through the shutter. All of a sudden, the couple performing the rigorous act stopped abruptly, and Sabrina was sure she heard the both of them say simultaneously and in a harmonized manner, "Let's take the fun to the master bedroom," and immediately they left. Creepy was the only word that come to Sabrina's mind. Why did they stop all of a sudden? Oh my God! Dan! Sabrina called, but he didn't give her a response. She called him again, but this time, shook him vigorously. Thankfully, he responded by turning towards her, but Sabrina gasped from shock. The whole of Dan's eyes were pitch black. Sabrina knew Dan surely did something, that pitch black eyes were a signatory for vampires who were overwhelmed by their powers and possibly given in to their dark side. She gasped when a dark smile curled up his face, revealing sharpened teeth among the first neat row of white teeth, while his eyes were so black that she couldn't differentiate the sclera from the pupil, and she understood she was endangering herself by being so close to Dan at the moment. With heavy breaths, she stepped back a bit, but there was no way to run to while Dan kept staring at her interestedly. The way he was watching her sent tremors all over her body. Sabrina knew this was a game to him, cause he stood there, though unmoving but poised to act, as if he was the predator and she was the prey, watching and inspecting the best time to move in for the kill. Ego vocare T, Sabrina said with lightning speed, trying to summon a portal, not caring what the event horizon would do to this place anymore, albeit she was too late. He grabbed her waist and slammed her against his chest with enough force that a startled gasp tore from her throat. She tried to say a spell again, but his lips closed down on hers, silencing her words into incoherent whimpers. Sabrina understood at once she was fighting a losing battle against this skilled and experienced predator. She clearly understood what he was doing. He was silencing her from casting a spell, and though she could cast one inwardly, but her thinking was currently muddled thanks to his kisses, and he knows that. She somehow managed to summon a spell that blasted the wardrobe door, and because his back was pressed against it, he gave way and fell from the momentum, but something happened. He had managed to grab Sabrina and the both fell to the ground, with her landing on top of his chest. But before she could react, Dan used his speed and reversed their position. His strong, cold body fully immobilizing her solid yet soft and warm ones, pinning her wrists to the ground. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. Vampires in this state have their personal desires amplified, and she had a feeling she was the one who pushed him over the edge. Dan, she breathed, "You're stronger than this. Snap out of this nonsense," she pleaded with shaky breath. His hovering face wasn't doing her brain justice. Maybe, he was indeed right. She'd been living in denial all this time. She still had intense feelings for this guy, and it was quite ironic. It took him being in his dark state for her to realize it. "What if I don't want to? What would you do?" came his throaty challenge, and she gulped nervously. It was going to be a huge work returning this guy to his senses. How can you save someone that doesn't want to be saved? The girl knew she could use this opportunity to escape, but leaving him in this state? He'll cause one hell of a havoc before Asher arrives, especially with those teenagers still inside. Who knows what he would do to them? so the responsibility of bringing him back to his senses was dumped on her shoulder. Sabrina was about to give him a pep talk when his lips came down on hers again, this time more intense and hungrier than earlier. She tried to hold on to her normally rigid self-control, but it was fading with each of his breathtaking kisses. "Oh my God," she moaned when a rush of excitement passed through her and Dan smirked knowingly. Sabrina was so influenced under his touch that she didn't notice his fangs growing in length and gasped finally when he tore into the delicate skin of her neck and began to drink from her. At first, agony seared straight through her, which was followed up by an intense pleasure that almost drove her over the edge while his wandering hands explored her body. The feeling was like reaching orgasm, but this was much more consuming and fulfilling. When he stopped feeding and there was a sudden silence, Sabrina craned her neck towards him and shivered at the sight. His black eyes was burning with more than hunger. She felt goosebumps all over her body when his burning gaze drifted down her body, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. It was now or never. "Dolor iubs facium super te omnia," she said out of nowhere, and Dan was thrown off her body. She stood at once and used her magic to make the room soundproof and impenetrable. She wouldn't want those two idiots in the other room rushing in upon hearing the noise. "Stop this!" Dan, who was on his knees and grabbing his head, growled at her. "Fine then," she said, a wicked smile decorating her lips as she directed her magic at him, intensifying the pain. "Ah!" Dan screamed in pain, grabbing his head. He was having this extremely severe headache, as if his blood vessels were about to burst. "Stop!" he screamed. "Please," he added, beginning to vomit blood as his vision got blurry. The pain was unbearable. But Sabrina was not to be fooled. She continued inflicting the pain until he lost consciousness, completely stunned. Without wasting time, she approached him and took out the wrinkled sheet he had taken from Zukai earlier and dropped it on the study table. She summoned a pocket knife and then sliced open her palm a bit, letting the blood drop on the drawing bit by bit before chanting a spell. As her chants grew louder, gaining momentum, a heavy wind out of nowhere began to swirl in the middle of the room, thrashing and rattling objects until something flew straight at her and she caught it swiftly, the cell phone. She smirked victoriously and turned around only to discover Dan has woken from his short nap and he was back to normal. Anger like no other flooded her and she laced her fist with magic and gave him a blow that drew blood from his mouth. "Are you crazy? Do you know how risky it was getting into their head? Are you a sucker for pain or what?" she raged, throwing one punch after the other. Dan could not say a word but helplessly dodge her punches that were aimed at his vital organs. He understood what she was angry about. He had telepathy and able to project his thoughts to others and make them obey his orders. Unfortunately, that extent of his powers was still evolving. He hadn't mastered it fully. He had stressed his abilities to the limit and unfortunately lost himself for a while. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.